All right, so I have a Pro 10.5 sitting over here with an anti-glare film that we put onto it. And I have one of our brand new LN-EXO Pro 10.5 models. This is our Gen 2. You can tell it's got the adjustable power block at the bottom to adjust tension. You can see right now, I don't have the foam gasket inserted, so there's play in there right now. We're gonna get the iPad mounted into the case. We're gonna mount a ruggedized power cable into the cradle, and then we'll get that gasket piece put on there, and we will plug this in, and we will adjust tension on the power block until the iPad starts charging and until we get a tight fit with the top lock button. We'll sit the cradle over here. We have the iPad case. We're going to sit it on the table. We have our Allen key. We're going to back the screws out of the back of the case. And I'm being just super careful not to put any extra scuffs on the case. This is going to a customer, but you can see that even the little scuffs, this has a Type 3 mil-spec hard anodize on it, so it is pretty durable. All right, so I'm going to pull the back of the case off. You can see the whole back of the case has foam on it, wrapping around the edges. You can see our power button. It's locked in with 2 Allen screws. If you're doing maintenance on your LN-EXO, you might want to take it apart once in a while and just go ahead and drop some WD-40 on these screws just to make sure that they're not getting corroded, clean them off, especially if you're going to be out in some foul weather. You can see the top of the case has a harder gasket going the whole way around it. Down here you can see where the power cable goes into the case. I'm going to take our iPad. I'm going to carefully flip it over. Again, this is glass. You do have an anti-glare on it, but you want to be careful putting it into the case. Just drop it in like that. You can see the tolerances are very tight with our LN-EXO. I'm going to take our case. I'm going to carefully lay it on the back of the iPad and just make sure your camera lens clears the camera hole. And I'm not going to push down it. I'm just going to kind of line it up. And I will start dropping some screws in. All right. So now I got my screws placed in. I'm going to start here in the middle, and I'm just going to lightly push down on the case to get the screw started. You can see it started. Now I am not going to over tighten this. I feel the tension. I'm just going to get it to a point. I'm not going to fully tighten this side down. I'm going to move over here to the other side. Just like putting a wheel on a car. I'm going to work your way around in a star pattern, get it snug. I'm going to move down here to the bottom. Just get it started. Move up here to the top. Down here at the bottom. Get this one started just slightly, then I'll move up here to the top right, get that one started. Again, I'm just getting these lightly snug. Over here, 2 more. All right, now I have them all lightly snug. I'm just going to carefully lift up the iPad, and you can see we got a gap the whole way around. But you can see we got the screws started all the way around. I'm just going to move the box over here. I don't want to scuff the bottom of the iPad. Let's sit this up here so I can get a better view. And we're just going to start tightening these down, continuing in the star pattern. And again, we're not making these, we're just lightly tightening these. Again, I don't want to over tighten these to the point to where I crack the glass. Again, there's a foam layer in there, so you're pretty safe not to do that, but you definitely don't want to sit here and crank on this thing full force. I'm going to work my way around, and you can see on the edges, you just want to get it to the point where this is sealed. And that one, I can feel that one. That one bottomed out, or it's tight. But again, it's not over tight. Just go around. That one's lightly snug down. That one's good. Boom. That one just needed a little bit. Same with that. Same with that. Now what you don't want to do, you're pretty good with tightening these down snug, but you want to be careful. Depending on which anti-glare film you're using, we allow a slight tolerance for the anti-glare, but you do not want to put an anti-glare glass or a Gorilla Glass on top of the iPad and then try to put it in the EXO. It's just not going to fit. But you can see there we have everything tightened down. All the way around, everything's snug. So we're gonna just double check the power button to make sure everything is lined up with the power button. See a nice little click. And she works. So now we're gonna sit this to the side and work on the cradle. All right, so we're gonna sit down our cradle and we're gonna go ahead and remove the top of the plate on the power block. And you want to remove the top plate with these smaller screws. These two small screws release the top plate. These larger screws are set screws to adjust the tension of the power block between the iPad and the lock button. So if you want to do it, we'll do these later, but when you adjust the tension of the power block, you'll loosen up these set screws, these two large set screws, and then you have a corkscrew at the bottom to slide the power block up and down. Once you get it to the right tightness, we're going to go ahead and tighten down the set screws. And again, you don't want to over tighten these. But right now, we're going to take the top of the power block off with these two smaller screws. And I'm going to leave these screws in here, prepped, like this. Just like that. Because we're going to take one of our ruggedized Apple cables. Again, this is just a stock Apple cable that comes with the iPad. This is the best cable to use. We've tried a lot of aftermarket cables and they just don't hold up like the stock Apple cable. So we go ahead and put military braiding onto the Apple cable, and we use military grade heat shrink with adhesive inside to lock it down. Right now, this cable is pre-made, so I know how this fits into the power block well. You could just put the cable in just like we ship it, like this. You can see how it's fitted pretty snug right between the opening. But what I like to do, you want to get this height correct, the height of this cable. If the cable's too low in the housing, you won't charge the iPad. So if you're going to replace this cable, just pay attention to the height of this cable. You also want to make sure that it's parallel and not canted to the side. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble locking your iPad in. Just by practice, I know that if you take one of these stock ruggedized Apple cables that we send out, and we take another little piece of heat shrink like this right here, I'm going to go ahead and slide this down right below the bend of the connector, and that's just going to help seat it up high enough and lock it into place. I'm going to go ahead and heat this up. Let's double check this. It looks a little bit too wide. Yeah, that's a little bit too wide, so I'm going to get some scissors. I'm going to trim this down just a little bit. All right, so again, I'm just going to take a little bit off of this heat shrink. Just want a little ring of it, like that. That's going to help space this cable up into the housing where it needs to be. Again, I just know that I'm going to put this right around the bend, like that. And we're going to take our heat gun. Without burning myself, I'm going to try not to. I'm going to get it started right there. Get that heat shrink started around the bottom there. And then I'm going to go ahead, kick this thing into gear, get this heated up a little bit. Now, before it hardens, I'm going to place it into the power block. Again, I'm going to make sure that the blade is parallel. I'm going to take the top of the power block, and looking at that blade to make sure it's parallel, I'm going to start pressing down on that to help conform the heat shrink to the housing. I'm going to get these screws started. Again, I'm just going to double check that this is parallel. The height looks good. I'm going to go ahead and again snug this down. I don't want to crack the connector, so I'm not going to over tighten it. Just going to get it snug. Looks pretty good. And you'll learn the height that this needs to be. I just know if you put a little bit of that heat shrink down there around the bend, you want that bend to that connector just to be a little bit higher up on the power block. Otherwise, you won't have enough adjustment to actually power the iPad. All right. So there we go. We have the power cord installed. All right, so now we're going to take our foam gasket. If you need a replacement foam gasket, we do have spare parts kits now in our hardware store. We're going to flip the cradle around like this. And I like just to prep an Allen wrench just to help press the foam around the connector. But you can do a test fit on it. You can see I haven't pulled the adhesive off yet, but that's how it's going to go on. If you're not comfortable on the height that the power connector needs to be, if you want, you can put this on, drop the power cable into the power block, and go ahead and test fit the iPad to make sure everything's good to go before you go and put this adhesive on. Because once we tear this off, put the adhesive on, it's actually going to connect the top of the power block to the bottom, and you're pretty much going to waste this. You're going to have to peel it off and go ahead and pull this apart, or try to pull just the bottom off and get that adjusted. And it's easier if you're not comfortable in the height that this needs to be, to just leave this sticky tape on here, put the connector on there, go ahead and drop your power cable in, and then go do a test run of that power before you go ahead and commit. But that looks pretty good, so I'm going to pull this off. And I don't want to pull on this, or I'm going to stretch it past the edges of the power block. I'm just going to get it started I know it's hard to see, but I'm going to get it started on there around the power block. And I'm going to make sure it's lined up well, like that. It's lined up on the edges. And then I'm just going to start from the end, work my way in. And this is where I'll take the Allen key and maybe help it around the connector, like this. Again, this is going to a customer, so I'm trying to do a good job on this for him. Drop that down on the back there. Just help seat that around there. And that's a pretty good job. Got the foam seated on there. All right, turn this back around. Now, the moment of truth. We're going to plug this in, and then we're going to drop the iPad into it to make sure everything's lined up and to make sure that we start charging. All right, so we got the cradle, power cable installed. I have the power cable plugged into an outlet. I'm going to take our iPad, and when you place it into the cradle, you're just going to start up high, like this. You're going to start it up high, start sliding it down on the bottom two guides. And once you get it down as far as it'll go, you just want to lightly push down to press on the top lock button to level the iPad out into the grooves. And we're going to go ahead and slide it down the rest of the way. And you can see as soon as I slid it down, I don't even have it locked in yet, that we started to power up. So I'm going to pick it up here. And you can see I'm just going to try to do this on camera, but I'm just going to push this down a little bit and see if I can lock the button like that. You can see the fit's already pretty decent. I would actually leave it just like that. It is a little tight right now, but again, this is a Type 3 mil-spec anodized on aluminum. Just like something like an AR rifle, this will wear in a bit and loosen up. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to tighten back up the tension between the power block and the power button. But again, I can take the iPad out. Again, it's a little tight right now. Just push that down, slide it out, and the case comes right out of the cradle. Again, I can seat it, level it out on the cradle, and it started charging. So what we're going to do is we're going to loosen the two set screws. Again, you're just loosening these up. These are just set screws. And you can see the entire power block loosened up. Now we're going to stick the Allen wrench into the bottom, into this cork adjuster, this corkscrew. And I'm just going to go counterclockwise just a hair. And what that's doing, it's sliding this power block up and down on the groove. So let's see if I can lock the iPad into the case easier. It's actually locked into place. So let's see if I just feel the tension on that. See how tight it feels. Again, you can adjust this over time. So I'm just going to loosen that a bit. And I know right about where it needs to be to keep the iPad tight in the cradle. Once I got it to where it needs to be, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up these set screws again. Again, don't crank on these threads. You'll feel it hit bottom. And again, if you really wanted to, or if you had trouble with these loosening up on you, you could get this thing dialed in and drop a little bit of blue Loctite in there. but I don't usually do that. I just get it snug like that. All right, let's see how we're doing now. Push the button, slide the iPad out. You can see that it's came off charge. Now I'm going to level it back out. Turn it around to make it easier on me. Boom. Locked in, no problem. It's a little bit looser now. If this is going into a personal vehicle or something that you're not racing, I would probably roll with it just like that. If you hear a little bit of rattling or if this starts loosening up on you, again, you can just loosen up these two set screws and tighten up the corkscrew just slightly clockwise and then re-tighten up your set screws. But that looks pretty good. Everything is charging. You can see our charging lights on up here. If you place the iPad into the cradle and it was not charging, what you can do is you can just go ahead and see if you give it a little bit of thumb pressure, if it starts to kick in the charge. And what that means is you don't have the power block up high enough. So the first thing to try is to loosen up the set screws and give a little tension on the corkscrew to bring the power block up until it starts charging. If it does not start charging within a reasonable adjustment of the power block, then you want to take the power cable out and readjust the position of the power cable in the housing. You're going to want the power cable to be up a little bit higher. Again, that's why I stick this little piece of gasket down low on the elbow of the connector to help support the cable and to keep it up high where it needs to be. Again, you might want to put some WD-40 on this, a light coating, just to help lube up the anodize. You can also drop some WD-40 onto the guides to help it slide in and out of the cradle easier. Everything is sealed up on the LN-EXO the whole way around. The only place where this can leak or get moisture into it is when it's not in the cradle on the bottom port. And you got to be careful about the power button. The tolerance is super tight in here on the power button, but if there is heavy rain, I would suggest, or if you're going to have this thing in harsh conditions, you might want to take a piece of electrical tape or a sticker and just slap it on here. The other thing you can do if you really want to is before you put this into the case, if you wanted to put a bead of silicone on either side of the button, just make sure you don't put too much in there that you can't function the power button. But you want to put a little thin bead of silicone in there. Other than that, as long as everything's sealed up tightly, this thing is darn near dunkable in the water when it's mounted in the cradle. Now, with that, Apple Care, Apple Care, Apple Care. I highly suggest running Apple Care. When you're spending this kind of money on a setup, you definitely want to invest in Apple Care, mostly for the moisture. If you break a screen, it might be worth it just to go somewhere and get the screen replaced, but I still recommend going straight to Apple to get that screen replaced. The other things with the cradle, you might want to pop this button off once in a while. These are very tiny Allen screws, so make sure you have the Allen key that comes with the cradle seated all the way so you don't strip these screws. But you want to go ahead and back these two screws out. There's a single spring under there. Then you might want to put some WD-40 under there. Make sure to get the grime out of there. If this button is hard to function, you can take that off and clean it out and get all the junk out of there. But that's it. That's for the full assembly of the LN-EXO. The cradle itself has 4 screws, so you can direct dash mount it into a custom fitted dash, or it has the amps pattern to put ram mount ball and their assortment of mounting hardware to mount this thing pretty much into any vehicle.